The Philippines presents a compelling, yet perplexing, case study in development economics. Superficially, macroeconomic indicators paint a picture of robust growth. Yet, beneath the surface, persistent poverty, widening inequality, and a palpable sense of economic insecurity challenge this narrative. This disconnect demands rigorous analytical scrutiny. Yet, beneath the surface, persistent poverty, widening inequality, and a palpable sense of economic insecurity challenge this narrative. This disconnect demands rigorous analytical scrutiny. This script aims to dissect the structural factors that prevent aggregate economic growth in the Philippines from translating into widespread prosperity for its citizens. We will move beyond headline GDP figures to explore the underlying dynamics of labor markets, capital accumulation, fiscal policy, and institutional quality, offering an analytical framework for understanding this critical development challenge. Aggregate economic growth, typically measured by gross domestic product, GDP, serves as a primary indicator of national economic activity. The Philippines has demonstrated consistent GDP expansion over recent decades, often cited as a regional success story. However, GDP is fundamentally a measure of output, not welfare or distribution. While the economy grew by 5.2% in Q4 2024 and 5.4% in Q1 2025, these figures, while positive, fell short of projections, highlighting underlying vulnerabilities. More significantly, GDP growth does not inherently reveal who benefits from this expansion. It can mask significant disparities in income, wealth, and access to opportunities. Economists understand that GDP per capita, while a better proxy for average income, still fails to capture the distribution of that income. High growth rates can coexist with stagnant or declining living standards for large segments of the population if the gains are concentrated among a small elite. This is the core of the Philippine paradox. Analyzing the composition of GDP growth is crucial. Is it driven by investment, consumption, or exports? Is it concentrated in capital-intensive sectors or labor-intensive ones? Understanding these drivers provides insight into whether growth is inherently inclusive or exclusive. Furthermore, alternative metrics like the Human Development Index, HDI, Gini coefficient, and poverty headcount ratio offer a more nuanced view of societal progress. While the Philippines has seen improvements in some of these areas, the pace of improvement often lags behind the rate of GDP growth, particularly concerning inequality. The analytical challenge lies in identifying the transmission mechanisms, or lack thereof, between macroeconomic performance and microeconomic well-being. Why are the benefits of national wealth creation not trickling down effectively to the majority of Filipino households? This requires a deeper dive into the structural characteristics of the Philippine economy. Overseas Filipino workers, OFWs, constitute a significant and unique component of the Philippine economic model. Their remittances, exceeding $36 billion annually and accounting for roughly 9% of GDP, are a vital source of foreign exchange and a major driver of domestic consumption. This inflow provides a crucial buffer against external shocks and supports aggregate demand. From a macroeconomic perspective, remittances boost national income and contribute directly to GDP through increased household spending. They also help maintain a relatively stable balance of payments position. This reliance on external labor markets has been a consistent feature of the Philippine economy for decades. However, an analytical perspective reveals the inherent risks and structural distortions associated with this model. Dependence on remittances can disincentivize the development of robust domestic industries capable of generating high-value employment. It can lead to a form of Dutch disease, where the inflow of foreign currency strengthens the local currency, making domestic exports less competitive. Moreover, the social costs are substantial, including family separation and brain drain. The most skilled and dynamic members of the workforce often seek opportunities abroad, depleting the pool of human capital available for domestic innovation and industrial development. This perpetuates a cycle where the economy relies on exporting its most valuable resource, its people, rather than creating opportunities for them at home. Economists must analyze the long-term sustainability of this model. What happens if global demand for Filipino labor shifts? What are the implications for domestic labor supply and wage levels? While remittances provide short-term stability, they may hinder the structural transformation necessary for sustainable, inclusive growth driven by domestic productivity gains. Policy analysis should focus on how to leverage remittances more effectively for productive investment rather than solely consumption. This could involve developing financial instruments tailored for OFWs or creating incentives for them to invest in domestic enterprises. However, the fundamental challenge remains building a domestic economy that can absorb and adequately compensate its own skilled workforce. The Philippine labor market presents another critical area for analysis. While unemployment rates have seen some improvement, the focus must shift to the quality and nature of employment being generated. A significant portion of job creation occurs in low productivity, low-wage sectors, failing to provide pathways to economic security for many. The business process outsourcing (BPO) sector is often highlighted as a source of formal employment. While it has created millions of jobs, many roles are routine, offer limited career progression, and provide wages that, while potentially higher than minimum wage, are often insufficient to support a middle-class lifestyle, especially in high-cost urban areas. The analytical question is whether this sector fosters genuine human capital development or primarily leverages a cost advantage in labor. The informal sector remains a massive employer, accounting for over 40% of the workforce. Workers in this sector lack job security, benefits, and legal protections. Their incomes are often volatile and below the poverty line. This large informal economy represents a significant drag on productivity and tax revenue, while also leaving a large segment of the population vulnerable to economic shocks. Even within the formal sector, real wage growth has been sluggish. Minimum wage adjustments have often failed to keep pace with inflation, particularly for essential goods and services. This erosion of purchasing power means that even with a job, households may struggle to meet basic needs or accumulate savings. Analyzing the relationship between minimum wage policy, inflation, and labor productivity is essential. The structure of employment reveals a concentration in services, often low value-added services, rather than manufacturing or high-tech industries that typically offer higher wages and greater potential for productivity growth. This structural imbalance limits the potential for broad-based income increases. Economists need to analyze the factors contributing to low labor productivity, such as inadequate investment in education and skills training, poor infrastructure, and inefficient market structures. Policies aimed at improving job quality must address skills mismatches, promote formalization of the informal sector, and encourage investment in higher-value industries. Perhaps the most significant impediment to inclusive growth in the Philippines is its deeply entrenched inequality and wealth concentration. The country exhibits one of the highest Gini coefficients in Southeast Asia, indicating a highly unequal distribution of income and wealth. A small number of powerful families control vast swathes of the economy, from key industries to political institutions. This oligarchic structure has profound economic implications. It can lead to rent-seeking behavior, where economic actors focus on extracting wealth through political connections and market manipulation rather than through productive innovation and competition. This distorts markets, stifles competition, and hinders the efficient allocation of resources. Wealth concentration also limits aggregate demand, as a large portion of the population lacks the purchasing power to drive consumption. It can also perpetuate inequality across generations by limiting access to quality education, healthcare, and financial services for those outside the elite circles. According to the Philippine Statistics Authority, millions remain below the national poverty line, a stark contrast to the narrative of a getting richer nation. The richest 1% capture a disproportionate share of national income and wealth, while the middle class remains relatively small and vulnerable. Analyzing the political economy of inequality is crucial. How do entrenched interests influence policymaking to maintain their dominant positions? What are the barriers to entry for new businesses and entrepreneurs? Addressing inequality requires not only progressive taxation and social safety nets, but also structural reforms to promote competition, strengthen institutions, and curb corruption. Economists must analyze the links between market structure, political power, and economic outcomes. Policies aimed at fostering inclusive growth must directly confront the issue of wealth concentration and its corrosive effects on economic efficiency and social equity. Inflation, particularly for essential goods, acts as a regressive tax, disproportionately harming low-income households. While headline inflation rates fluctuate, the persistent rise in the cost of food, transport, housing, and utilities significantly erodes the purchasing power of average Filipinos, even those with stable incomes. In 2024, food inflation remained a significant concern, hovering around 6 to 8%, far outpacing wage increases for many. For households spending a large percentage of their income on food, this level of inflation represents a substantial cut in real income. Analyzing the drivers of this inflation, whether supply-side shocks, demand pressures, or exchange rate movements, is critical for effective policy response. Monetary policy, managed by the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas (BSP), aims to control inflation. However, the effectiveness of monetary policy can be limited by structural factors, such as supply chain inefficiencies, agricultural sector vulnerabilities, and global commodity price volatility. Analyzing the transmission mechanism of monetary policy in the Philippine context is essential. Fiscal policy also plays a role in mitigating the impact of inflation through targeted subsidies or social assistance programs. However, the fiscal space for such interventions can be constrained by government debt levels and revenue collection efficiency. The cost of living crisis highlights the vulnerability of the majority of the population to economic fluctuations. It underscores the need for policies that not only aim for aggregate price stability, but also address the specific cost pressures faced by low-income households and ensure that wage growth keeps pace with inflation. Analyzing the real wage trends adjusted for inflation provides a more accurate picture of living standards than nominal wage figures alone. Economic development is intrinsically linked to the quality and accessibility of public services and infrastructure. In the Philippines, significant gaps persist, particularly outside major urban centers, hindering productivity, limiting opportunities, and reinforcing inequality. Underinvestment in human capital, education, and healthcare has long-term consequences for labor productivity and social mobility. Overcrowded public hospitals, underfunded schools, and a lack of access to quality healthcare and education, especially in rural and marginalized communities, perpetuate cycles of poverty. Analyzing the returns on investment in these sectors is crucial for justifying increased public expenditure. Infrastructure deficits, including inadequate transportation networks, unreliable power supply, and limited digital connectivity, increase the cost of doing business, hinder market access for producers, and limit access to services for citizens. While there have been efforts to boost infrastructure spending, the historical backlog and the scale of the need remain substantial. Analyzing the efficiency and impact of infrastructure projects is vital. Furthermore, the effectiveness of public spending is often undermined by issues of governance, including corruption and bureaucratic inefficiency. Resources intended for public services and infrastructure are siphoned off or mismanaged, reducing the actual impact on development outcomes. Analyzing the institutional factors that impede effective public service delivery is a critical area for economic research. Addressing these deficits requires sustained and strategic public investment. This necessitates improving government revenue collection, prioritizing expenditure towards high-impact areas, and strengthening governance mechanisms to ensure accountability and transparency in public spending. Analyzing the fiscal capacity of the government and the potential for innovative financing mechanisms is essential. Achieving inclusive growth in the Philippines requires a fundamental shift in development strategy. It necessitates moving beyond a focus solely on aggregate GDP numbers to prioritize policies that ensure the benefits of growth are broadly shared across the population. This requires a multifaceted approach addressing structural impediments. Strengthening domestic industries is paramount to reduce reliance on external labor markets and create higher-value jobs at home. This involves targeted industrial policy, investment in research and development, and support for small and medium enterprises, SMEs, which are significant employers. Analyzing the potential for specific sectors to drive inclusive growth is key. Improving labor market outcomes requires raising real wages, enhancing labor protections, and investing in skills development programs aligned with the needs of growing industries. Formalizing the informal sector through appropriate incentives and support mechanisms is also crucial. Analyzing the impact of labor market regulations on both employment and worker welfare is necessary. Significant and strategic investment in human capital, education, health, and physical infrastructure is essential to boost productivity, enhance competitiveness, and expand opportunities, particularly in underserved regions. Analyzing the optimal allocation of public resources and the effectiveness of different investment modalities is critical. Progressive tax reform is necessary to generate the revenue needed for public investments and to address wealth inequality. This involves broadening the tax base, improving tax collection efficiency, and ensuring that the wealthiest individuals and corporations contribute their fair share. Analyzing the incidence and economic effects of different tax policies is vital. Finally, tackling corruption and strengthening institutions are foundational to creating an environment conducive to inclusive growth. This involves enhancing transparency, accountability, and the rule of law to curb rent-seeking behavior and ensure that economic policies serve the public interest rather than narrow elite interests. Analyzing the economic costs of corruption and the benefits of good governance is a key area of research. Inclusive growth must become the explicit central objective of economic policy, measured not just by GDP, but by improvements in poverty reduction, inequality reduction, job quality, and access to essential services for all Filipinos. The Philippine economic narrative is one of paradox. Aggregate wealth is increasing, yet widespread prosperity remains elusive. This is not merely a matter of slow trickle-down. It is a consequence of deep-seated structural issues that concentrate the benefits of growth while leaving the majority vulnerable. The reliance on remittances, the prevalence of low-quality jobs, extreme inequality driven by an oligarchic structure, the corrosive impact of inflation on real incomes, and persistent deficits in public services and infrastructure collectively undermine the potential for inclusive development. For economists, the Philippine case offers a compelling challenge to conventional growth models. It underscores the critical importance of analyzing not just the rate of growth, but its quality, composition, and distribution. Addressing the Philippine paradox requires a rigorous, evidence-based approach focused on structural transformation, institutional reform, and policies explicitly designed to foster equity and resilience. The goal must be an economy where growth genuinely translates into improved living standards, expanded opportunities, and greater economic security for all citizens, not just a privileged few. We urge fellow economists to deepen research into these structural impediments, contribute to evidence-based policy design, and engage in public discourse to advocate for reforms that prioritize inclusive growth. Analyze the data, challenge the assumptions, and help chart a course towards a Philippine economy where national prosperity is truly reflected in the well-being of its people.